Hi, everybody. So we have a couple of readings this week that I've assigned. The first one that I'm going to summarize here and kind of explain to you is Donald Murray's All Writing is Autobiographical. So Murray was a very notable but very accessible writing scholar, writing in the field of writing studies or rhetoric and composition, as us professionals like to call it. So this article was first published in 1991, again in 3Cs, which is now 4Cs. They've expanded the name of the organization, but this is the primary journal that people in writing studies publish in. So Murray is one of my favorite writing scholars, mostly because he has a very accessible style. He writes very conversationally, so his writing doesn't seem deeply academic, even though it is based on really good data. He writes to a broad audience, not only to academics. So this is why I've assigned this reading. It's a good reading to introduce students to the way that Murray talks about writing and how writing can be a wonderful thing. So his claim here is that all writing is an autobiography, or it's always somehow a reflection of the individual writer. We can't really get away from who we are when we're writing. And so we'll be revisiting this idea over and over again that who we are as human beings really shapes how we approach different writing situations. So one of his claims in this article is he writes, quote, he claims that his, quote, own peculiar way of looking at the world and his own way of using language infuses his fiction, his nonfiction, even the poetry that he's written. So he uses examples from his own writing in this article to point out what is from his life and what is because of his life. So the things that have shaped him as he approaches writing. And of course, for him, he really thinks that writing is kind of a therapy, right? It's a way to understand how we know each other, right? And how we can look back on things. So he refers to the autobiographical nature of texts, all of which necessarily contain traces of their creators. So a key quote here is that, quote, "We are autobiographical in the way we write. I have my own peculiar way of looking at the world and my own way of using language to communicate what I see. My voice is the product of all the language I have heard and spoken." So it's not so much that he's encouraging a kind of narcissism or navel gazing, so much that he is suggesting that writers approach a writing situation kind of looking from the inside out. We are looking both inward as well as outward. So he kind of gives writers permission to be themselves when they write. And of course, his argument is that, in fact, we will always be ourselves, right? So students can find this essay a place from which to enter into the scholarly conversation about how writers construct texts. So his ideas about the autobiographical nature of texts and readings also align with several other things that we will be reading both in this unit and in future units. So some of the take-home points here is that writers' worldviews inform all the texts that they write, not just the personal writing that we do, but also the academic writing that we do. As well, writing can be a way to discover who we are and what we think. And again, that goes back to Murray's whole idea is that writing can kind of be this therapeutic thing. And then what we write says as much about us as human beings as it does the subject about which we are writing. So if you can keep those things in mind as you approach Murray's writing, that would be fantastic. The second reading that we have is Chinks In My Armor, written by Julie Wan.
This is an example student literacy narrative written in 2018. Wan was born in China and moved to New York at the age of 3. And she had anxiety with speaking English. She, would stumble over her words just as an English language learner. It's a difficult thing, especially when you use different letter sounds in English than you do in Chinese, and it's just something that can be a struggle, and it makes people who are trying to assimilate to American culture really feel anxious and perhaps not as smart as they actually are. So her anxiety compelled her to assimilate to American culture through writing. So she really fostered her writing skills. She worked really hard on it so that she could start to fit in, and eventually, her English speaking grew as she grew and got used to American culture. So there's a key quote here that I think is really sums things up for this essay. She writes, "And yet all this time, I've been envisioning a perfect American English that doesn't exist. Any transmission, regardless of its form, is an attempt in flux and never assured. Its interpretation is based on the audience and the totality of their experiences." So yeah, you think of our American English, there isn't any kind of perfect. It's constantly changing. It's in flux and it's never assured, right? Because it can change from location to location and the various social groups they are a part of, especially for speaking. And then, and next week in our readings, you'll see that this also goes into writing as well. So these are some new ideas that we're going to be thinking about, how our culture and the people around us and our location all kind of contribute to how we become literate and how we grow. So this piece that she wrote actually was published in Stylus, which is a journal of first-year writing from the University of Central Florida, and it's, I think, a really stellar literacy narrative from a first-year writing student. So I think it's a good idea to provide example essays for students, so that you know what sorts of things you want to concentrate on and how you want to tell your story and that kind of thing. So the take-home points for Wan's literacy narrative is that language and identity are inextricably linked, that language acquisition and use are idiosyncratic, right? Depends on so many different factors, and that there is no perfect, stable American English.